Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Vimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamiti Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvasesha Sunyavadi Pastyachari Satarine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvasesha Sunyavadi Pastyachari Satarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gauravakta Vrindam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gauravakta Vrindam Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai, Go Premanandi. All glorious to the assembled devotees, all glorious to Sri Guru and Gauranga, all glorious to Sri Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vishtaya Bhutale Sri Bhakti Bhakti Vedanta Swami Sri Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Navasesha Sanyavadi Pastichari Chatarni Vanchakalpaturubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. Hare Krishna, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, whatever it is, wherever you are, to all of you devotees around the world in New Zealand, Australia, Fiji, India, Malaysia, Philippines, and in Europe, in England, Ireland, Scotland, in Holland, Germany, Slovakia, Czech, France, wherever you else, Switzerland, wherever else, America, wherever else you may be, I offer my obeisances to you and pray that you will always remain at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada, and being at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada, becoming inspired to assist Srila Prabhupada's mission to spread Krishna consciousness in whatever way you can, wherever you are. You don't have to go traveling the world, especially these days. You may not be able to anyway. And you may know when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was discussing with his most intimate associate, Ramananda Roy, what is the goal of human form of life. And Ramananda Roy was quoting various statements from scripture and different, according to different situations, different statements may be there. Lord Chaitanya was recognizing the various statements of Ramananda Roy, but saying, that's all right, but that is still related to this temporary external world. It's still touched or mixed with, we can say, conditional aspects. And then he came to a verse which was spoken by Lord Brahma. I wish I could remember the verse, but it begins with Jnane prayasamudurapastan manta eva. It's in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 14th chapter, if I'm not mistaken. And in this verse, Lord Brahma, or they could say in this case, Ramananda Roy, stated that it doesn't matter where you are, you stay with you wherever you are. You don't have to go anywhere. You just dedicate yourself to hearing the messages spoken or about the Lord, Krishna conscious subject matter from the pure devotees of the Lord. Now, Jiva Prana is finding that verse. Jnane Prayasam is a very famous verse. It'd be nice to read it if we can find it. So this infers, and again, Lord Chaitanya said the same thing, Yada Deki Tara Kara Krishna Pradesh, Amara Agya Guru Tara Nadesh, that wherever you are, he said, doesn't matter. You stay where you are. Here it is. We've got it on screen. If you can, yeah, that's it. Jnane Prayasam Udapastya Namante Eva Jivanti Sanmukaritam Bhavadiya Vartam Stane Stita Shrutikitam Tanuvan Manomir E Prayasho Jita Jito Vyasitais Kyam. So we're going to run forward now to the translation, please. Ramananda Roy continued. Lord Brahma said, "My dear Lord, those devotees who have thrown away the impersonal conception of the absolute truth and have therefore abandoned discussing empiric philosophical truths should hear from self-realized souls about your holy name, form, pastimes, and qualities. They should completely follow the principles of devotional service and remain free from illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, and animal slaughter. Surrendering themselves fully with body, words, and mind, they can live in any ashram or social status. Indeed, you are conquered by such persons, although you are always unconquerable." It's we could say, very relevant to our present situation, where many devotees are not able to travel very much right now, or don't want to travel very much right now for various reasons. But you don't need to absolutely necessarily travel. But we should cultivate this mood of pure devotional service, whereby there's no... Is there a purport to that, Rasika?
There was no purport, Maharaj.
The purport will be in the 10th canto, I think.
Oh, okay. 1 second.
Should be there. I think it's 10th canto. Anyway, never mind if it's not. But to cultivate this mood, if we actually hear from a pure devotee, we will pick up on his mood. This morning we were discussing, today is the day, or yesterday and today, where devotees who know the devotee named Tribhuvanatha Prabhu, who was like the most inspirational devotee in our English yatra. He left the world 20 years ago today. Well, not today exactly, but they're celebrating today. And a week ago, actually, to be honest. But anyway, they're celebrating today. So we discussed a little bit this morning in class about Tribhuvanatha Prabhu. One of the things in regards to this is that when he joined when he was 16 years old, he joined the temple, and he became the president of the temple in London when he was 17 years old. And you can't imagine such a thing happening nowadays. I don't think you can. Temple president of the London temple, he's only been in the movement maybe 3 months, 4 months. And he's 17 years old, and he's the temple president. And he never even met Prabhupada at this point of time. And one devotee this morning I was reading, was the first thing they noticed about Tribhuvanatha was he never stopped talking about what Prabhupada said. And he said, "Where did you hear all this from Prabhupada?" He said, "Oh, I've never met him." He said, "I've read it all in Prabhupada's books." So we actually, because he had a very hard life before he became a devotee. He was basically an orphan. He was going from care home to care home as a kid. And he didn't really have, he had a very loving mother, but she wasn't able to, he had a big family in Ireland, wasn't able to care for them all properly. And I think the father was not really in the picture. So he was kind of like, didn't have much of a childhood. He was almost illiterate, almost. Not illiterate, but semi-illiterate. But he was, there was something deep inside his heart, obviously from a previous lifetime. That upbringing naturally established a detached mood within his heart, a renounced detached mood, which he was an emblem of detachment. But detachment in devotional service is not like the normal understanding of detachment. Detachment in devotional service means attachment to Krishna, which automatically, spontaneously causes detachment from Maya. So he was so attached to Prabhupada and pleasing Prabhupada. There was no room for attachment, for material sense enjoyment. It's not a question of fighting against it. Sometimes we get upset and we become, anxious and so on because we have material attachments. And sometimes we get mental and even depressed or even disheartened and so on. But that's no doubt that is a problem, you could say. But the real thing is not to dwell on that, but to try to dwell on the positive thing. As I mentioned, probably you've heard before, but one thing I learned from Stephen Hawking, the famous atheistic scientist who died a few years ago, and he was the most famous scientist on the planet, and he was diagnosed with MND, motor neuron disease, when he was 20, and the doctors gave him 1 year to live. And he said, I'm going to prove them wrong. And he lived another 50 or more years. And he became the world's top scientist. And one of his statements, the only one I thought was worth applying that I know of, the rest were all, you could say, anti-God statements practically. But this one was something very useful. He said his secret, which he would tell to anyone, whoever they are, was focus on what you can do and not what you cannot. Most people are so absorbed in what they cannot do. They don't try to imitate or whatever it is, or do something beyond reality, our present state of, let's say, consciousness. But do focus on what we really can do. Everyone has something to offer in Krishna service. So we utilize that in Krishna service. What can we do in Krishna service and focus on that? And gradually, as we increase, you could say, our absorption, our bhava for devotional service increases, naturally we will lose interest in that which is. And even if we don't lose interest in that which is an obstacle, it will no longer be the sort of obstacle which disheartens us necessarily. If we continually try to engage in that which is, let's say, favorable, that which we can do in devotional service, that which pleases Krishna. And that's what Krishna knows. If you ever spoken in a foreign language, a few words, you can't speak much. But when you do speak a few words, people who speak that language immediately notice. Maybe it's not pronounced so well. Some countries they may not understand, but in most places, they understand you're trying to speak. And that's all they understand. If you speak your own language and they don't understand it, or the other way around, they're speaking your language but you only understand the one word or two words that they say. That's what counts. So in devotional service, as much as we're aiming for pure devotional service, but we may not be on that level of pure devotion. We can't imitate. But whatever we can do, we try to do that with all our hearts and encourage others to do also, whatever service they can, because everyone is Krishna's servant. Even your dog is Krishna's servant, if you have a dog, or your cat, or your bajrigar. I don't know if you do, probably not. But some devotees do. And, even they can be engaged. They can do some service. At least they can take prasadam, if nothing else. Sometimes they can do more than that. But whatever, every living entity is entitled to this gift of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And what is that gift? That gift, as we heard in this particular verse of Lord Brahma, this special gift of being able to hear the name, form, pastimes, and Krishna from self-realized souls like Srila Prabhupada has given the world this opportunity, and it behooves us to try to take or distribute that message as the gopis themselves, at least Radharani and the gopis, the most famous verse in the Gita, Gopi Gita. Now we're in the month of Damodar, Kartik Vrata. And some devotees, it's not a regulated principle, it's something nice to do, but it's not something which was done during Prabhupada's time. But some devotees sing the Gopi Gita during this month, for whatever reason. And the most famous verse there is Tavagatam Mitam Tapta Jivanam Kavibiritam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadatatam Buddhi Grinanti Burida Janaha. Most famous verse in that series of prayers of the gopis, that the topics concerning Krishna, topics spoken by Krishna, this is the greatest panacea, the only relief for those struggling in this material world, to hear these topics. Such topics are spoken, even whatever they may be, even though they may not be spoken in other verses, describing the most erudite language, but nonetheless, those devotees who are taking this message, distributing this message all over the world, are the greatest welfare workers in the world. So we may not be anything much, we may not even be able to follow the principles which we've just mentioned strictly, but if somehow or another we make ourselves ambassadors of the holy name, or distributing the transcendental prasadam books, etc., whenever we can, then we're serving those devotees who are the Burida Janas, the Burijans, those most merciful personalities. I was watching a video of this devotee I mentioned just now, Tribhuvanatha Prabhu, whose 20th Tirubhav anniversary is now. I was watching a video of him last night, and he was in this video, he was with Mahavishnu Swami, whom I call the Namahata Swami, because he wears a hat with a holy name on his hat. So he's a Namahata Swami. And he was with him, and they're old friends from the early days. And another devotee named, what's his name now? I've forgotten his name. But he was never initiated. This devotee had a serious accident on a motorbike, and he became slightly deformed and slightly damaged to his brain. So he wasn't able to function quite normally in society, but he was a devotee. He had the accident before he became a devotee. But he became a devotee, and he wasn't able, for whatever reason, to follow the regulated principles strictly. He had a problem with liquor, probably from his youth and young manhood and so on and so forth. And his main thing was he loved to serve the devotees. Service to the devotees is you could say Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj did say, is the key to love of God. Serving the Vaishnavas. It's the key to a taste in chanting of the holy names. This is the key. Service to Vaishnavas. So in any way we can serve the devotees, whatever way it is. It may be a little thing we can do, whatever we can do to serve the Vaishnavas. Whether they respond or not, that depends. But our mood is to try to develop the mood of how we can serve the devotees. Mm-hmm. So this devotee, Colin, his name was, if I'm not mistaken, he used to serve the devotees whenever he could, which wasn't always, because, as I said, he had a few shortcomings, health-wise as well as habit-wise. So one of the other things he loved to do was food for life, to spread Krishna consciousness. he loved Harinam as well. But he would, food for life was his speciality. He would use all of his government money because he couldn't work practically because he was somewhat impaired by his accident. So he would use whatever government money he got spare above and beyond his needs or his habitual needs. He would use it for food for life. And especially like to go to India whenever he could afford it and do food for life in India. So one year, and this was quite a few years ago, when he was in this picture with Tribhuvanatha, that's what reminded me. So that's what he could do. And everyone appreciated that. He couldn't get initiated because of obvious reasons, but his heart was in the right place, you could say. Although his condition, karma, may not have been quite so good, but his heart was his intentions were good. So one year when he was in Mayapur, he was going to go to Varanasi. He'd like to go to Varanasi to do food for life. So he was in Mayapur. It was a festival time, if I'm not mistaken, but he had no much money. So he'd stay with a friend in the Goswami in Mayapur. And in the middle of the night, he suddenly started feeling pain in his heart. And his friend who was there, said, what to do? And his friend was realizing he was having a heart attack, a major one. There was nothing he could do. He just quit his body right there in the Goswami in Mayapur in the middle of the night. Well, that sounds awful, or does it? Not really. It sounds great. Because what is the goal of our life? What is the goal of your life? You want to stay there? I can see devotees in York. You want to stay there in York? Yeah? You want to try to make, the Grand Old Duke of York? You want us to become the King of York? Remain there for eternity? Or there's devotees down there in New Zealand, the nicest place on earth, right? You can think you can stay there for eternity and enjoy the Mount Egmont, the mountain there, big volcano, extinct, by the way. No. And I can see other devotees there in Ayr, in Queensland, and in Christchurch, and in Manila, and Sydney, and in Nuremberg, and in many other places too, in Brisbane and Paris, and many places, Philippines, here and there. But how long can you stay, and what are you doing there? Becoming attached or not? Attached to where we are? We have to become attached to Krishna. And what better than to leave one's... No, we're not saying you should all go off to Mayapur and leave your body there on purpose. No, it doesn't work like that. Krishna is a controller. I remember one devotee, we call it devotee because he was living in Vrindavan, but he was a Gunda. You know what a Gunda is in Vrindavan? A Gunda are these kind of mafia, Indian mafia. And they're the people who usually, get things done in different ways. Not usually according to the law. They're kind of a law unto themselves, And you never know that you can't get past them. They're in control. Anyway, this one fellow it's a so-called ISKCON Gunda. You have to have your Gundas, otherwise you can't get anywhere. But he was quite a character. I used to know him fairly well. And he also, anyway, one thing or another, he was dying. I won't say why. Usual things amongst Gundas, they kind of compete with each other. And he was dying, and he was living in the Dham, and you think, oh, he's a lucky man. But it so happened, Krishna, you can't get away with it. He was taken out of the Dham to go to the hospital, and somewhere near Delhi on the way to the hospital, he left his body. So you can't trick Krishna like that. So this devotee didn't trick Krishna. He pleased Krishna. So he was able to leave his body in Mayapur Dham, where Lord Chaitanya does not take into account one's offenses. Not offenses even. Let's say in his case, there were no real offenses. It was just sinful habituation, which is just a passing cloud in the sky of our consciousness. It's not offensive in of itself in one sense. It may be, depending on our attitude. But knowing we're trying and it's difficult, it doesn't mean it's offensive. It means we're weak, but we're not offensive. Or at least we're trying not to be. And they were just attached because of conditional life, weakness of heart. But if the heart is in the right place, even if it is weak, still Krishna is pleased that we're making that sincere endeavor despite all difficulty. So Tribhuvanatha Prabhu, who was born in that situation where he went through a lot of difficulties, he joined the temple, he was very detached right from the word go, because he lived a life where he didn't have material facilities. He had nowhere to stay. Even in London, when he went to London, he met the devotees at 16 in London, and he had nowhere to stay. He was sleeping on the street. He had no money. It was all in his blood. And he just dedicated himself, his whole life, to devotional service. And because he felt so indebted, sometimes when we come from comfortable backgrounds with education and stuff, we're a little puffed up. We get a little puffed up, We think I'm, qualified. We think I know. We think I don't need to worry. I've got my, comforts. I've got my money. I've got my this and that. I've got my insurance policy. I've got a nice house. I've got a family. I've got the money, and I've got a car, and I've got a job. Okay, you can have all those things, but we have to be very careful we don't become attached. And consequently, our devotional service will be impeded or held up by these attachments. So he didn't have anything. He came to the temple materially with nothing, materially speaking. And I think something like that is there in the Bible. It's not, what do we have to offer? We don't have anything to offer. Everything belongs to Krishna, right? When Prithu Maharaj, who was also a partial expansion of the Lord, empowered expansion, when he received the 4 Kumaras, because he was a king, the 4 Kumaras were Brahmins. So when they visited Prithu Maharaj, what happened? Prithu Maharaj, being a Raja Rishi, the kings would all automatically offer welfare, charity to the Brahmins. That's their duty. It's not a question of, maybe. That's their duty. They didn't have to be asked. They automatically did. Nowadays, you ask and they still don't give. But in Vedic times, the kings, if they saw a Brahmin, they automatically wanted to give charity. So he said to the 4 Kumaras, actually, I really can't give you anything. Have you ever heard that for people on the street, door to door? Well, I really can't give you, I got nothing to give you. Whether they have or not, they often say this, I've got no money. And I've only got my card. And they get their wallet out, and you see this whole wad of notes in there as well. I've got no money. I'll quickly put it back. Whatever they have, it's a kind of an attempted way of politely saying no. It's not really better to say no in one sense, but anyway, whatever it is, it's the way they are. We may be the same mentality, whatever, but they say no money, I haven't got anything. But Prithu said the same thing. It's not a new thing. King Prithu said, I haven't got anything to offer, but his answer was a little different. And what he said, I've got nothing, because actually everything is yours already. Nothing is mine. I may be the king, but everything that I so-called my kingdom, etc., is your property, not mine. You can do what you like with it. You are allowing me to manage it on your behalf. That's all. It doesn't belong to me, he said, because you are the representative of God, and therefore everything belongs to you. So like that, to understand this principle, we don't really have anything to offer except for giving up this illusory attachment which we have to thinking something is mine. It takes time. The transformation is by offering, as Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, Yat Karoshi Dashnasi Yajosi Dadasya, that the beginning stage of devotional service, not of religion, but of devotional service, we offer the fruits of our work to Krishna, whatever it is, whatever you do, when you do it for him also. But we may be still attached to our work, we may be still attached to, even the fruits, but we try to offer what we can to the Lord. We may be attached to recognition and so on. But whatever we do, we continually try to offer that to the Lord. This way, one may gradually become purified of this illusion, this falsity, false proprietorship, which is me and mine in this world. I am thinking I am the body, and I'm thinking this is mine. This is the bonding illusion which we're in, which can be removed by the process of pure devotional service, which means following the pure devotees, trying to please a pure devotee. By the mercy of a pure devotee, you get Krishna's mercy to release us, to help us to, in other words, to become attached, attracted to rendering service to Krishna. And when you're with someone like Tribhuvanatha Prabhu, I don't know if I can show you a picture. Maybe I can in a little while. We'll try. Now, when we become attached to somebody like Tribhuvanatha Prabhu, then one is spontaneous. Many devotees, anyone who met him, will say it would be very hard to not be Krishna conscious in his association. It's so powerful, so powerful. For instance, in Kirtan, he would sometimes chant for like 7 hours non-stop, leading the Kirtan. At the top of his voice, and playing Mridanga at the same time on a stage, like in Africa, with like 10,000 Africans in a stadium in front of him. He would just go on for hours and hours and hours, and the whole stadium would start to dance practically. He had this potency, Shakti coming from, Shaktiman coming from Krishna, not the weird independent gods or something. He was, because he was so connected to Prabhupada, that Shakti would come through him and inspire everyone around, one way or another, inspire everyone around to become closer to Krishna. There's nothing he wouldn't, he was such an emblem of surrendered devotional service, such an example of pure devotional service, no doubt. And it's like he really was an amazing person. Although he wasn't really an institutional person, mostly he lived outside the institution in terms of what we consider institution. He would start new projects in new countries like that regularly. Especially he's famous for preaching in Scotland, of course, for those who are from the UK, and we have devotees from Scotland with us today. He was you could say, the founder, more or less, of our, not exactly the first one there, but the one who really established our Krishna conscious movement in Scotland, along with Kishore Prabhu, in Edinburgh. One of my disciples is with us today, Maharaja Prabhu, maybe another one, I don't know. But Maharaja Prabhu was living in Edinburgh. What was the name of that road? Forest Road or something? Where the first temple? Something like that. Forest Road, I think it was called, second thoughts. But I think it was Forest Road. Forest Road. Yeah, thank you, Rob. First temple in Scotland. They had a preaching in other places before, but the first temple in Forest Road, amazing place. And then he was also, of course, preaching in England, preaching in Ireland. And then he went to India in the early 70s. When things moved quickly in those days, the temple president, for instance, in London would change 6 to 8 times a year, quite often. You can't imagine that now. As I said, he was temple president when he was 17, just after initiation for maybe a month or two only. Then he went off to Scotland, or shortly after that, somewhere. He went maybe selling incense or something, but he went off somewhere. And then he went to Scotland to open up a temple there. And then when Prabhupada would come to England, whenever we recruited new devotees, when Prabhupada used to come every year to the UK, whenever he'd come, he would say, so I want, whoever the temple president was at the time, I want you to send as many devotees as possible now to India. And, if you made 8 devotees that year, 8 devotees were on their way to India. That's how it was. It wasn't, oh, they're my devotees. They're our devotees. No, they were just servants of the mission. And Prabhupada wanted devotees to go to India at that time, especially English devotees, because they didn't need a visa. So he went. I don't know if he was one of the ones who asked or he asked, but he went to India quite early in his, not so early, I mean, he'd been in the movement 4 or 5 years probably, but he went to India and he was helping with the Vrindavan project and collecting and helping to serve the Vrindavan temple for many years before the opening of the Vrindavan temple. And he would go here and there collecting even to the Middle East at that time. There were Indians in the Middle East, in Dubai or Kuwait, different cities. And he would go trying to raise funds for the Vrindavan temple. And he was also in Delhi. For next time I saw him in England and Scotland, of course, in the early days quite often. We were in the same temple many times. And what can I say? He's just such an inspirational personality. But next time I saw him was in Delhi in 1976. He was staying in Todamal Lane there in Delhi. If any of you know Delhi or you're in Delhi right now, that was our first temple in Delhi, a little tiny place. And Tribhuvanatha Prabhu was there. And he was so busy in raising funds for Vrindavan and other services. But he was there. And then shortly after Prabhupada departed, he was going to the Middle East to raise funds, but then he decided to go there to preach. So he made that time his Prabhudatha Desh, his main service in the Middle East. Now we all know that the Middle East is one of the most challenging places on this planet for preaching Krishna consciousness. It's not just challenging, it's life-threatening. It is very dangerous, you could say, for anyone to expect, especially if you're preaching what they would see as a different religion. It's a death penalty, practically. But anyway, he made that his goal because he knew. One of the things Prabhupada said, anyone who preaches in the Muslim countries, he's guaranteed to go back to Godhead. I take the dust from their feet, Prabhupada said, and place it on my head. And various statements like this, how important it was, let's say, to the mission of Krishna consciousness to somehow or another, at least to make the starters of introducing Krishna consciousness amongst our Muslim brethren and amongst others in China and so other places which were very difficult, may still be very difficult. So he took that on as his primary, pretty much his only service there in the late 70s and early 80s. And he gathered a small group of devotees to go there. And they, one of those was Bhakti Vaibhav Swami. He was named Avinash Chandra then, now Bhakti Vaibhav Swami. And if any of you are in Czech, Slovakia, or that part of the world, he's your GBC and maybe your guru. But he was one of that party. And there were others you won't probably know them, Padmapani and Mahakratu, Nikhilananda, and others were with him. And they managed to get some donations from here and there and purchase some cassettes or records called Change of Heart. And they got a vehicle from somewhere and they headed off. And they also had, by then, there was one devotee, a Prabhupada disciple named Ravanari. And he passed away a long time ago. We knew him quite a little bit, quite well maybe. And he was from Lebanon. He was an Arabic, Palestinian, to be honest, who was from Lebanon. And he'd actually translated Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita into Arabic. So that had been published in a very enormous book. It was really big. And we've still got a few copies here in France of that book. And so they took those as well. And together with the idea that they would try to sell these records, cassettes, and distribute the books somehow or another, try to get the preaching started. So they journeyed in this van. They got broke down and they got attacked in various places along the way by various persons, held at knife point, arrested by the PLO. So many things, and the devotees didn't realize what they were letting themselves in for. Tribhuvanatha Prabhu knew, but the devotees said he didn't seem to care. He didn't seem to think about it. He was so absorbed in this, in service to Prabhupada, he didn't even think about how dangerous it might be. He's so focused on his objective goal. So anyway, they managed eventually to reach Beirut and settled there. They preached in other countries too. And there was a civil war going on when they got there. Literally, there were bombs going off all around them. They would get every night the PLO or some other group would break into their apartment and just, with the intention probably of causing some problems, but they'd almost every time end up sitting with the devotees chanting Hare Krishna and taking prasad. He had this unique way of just winning people's hearts, no matter who they were, because he had no envy. He just cared. He just wanted to preach for Prabhupada. He saw everyone as a devotee, as a potential devotee at least. No matter what happened, he wouldn't become depressed or distressed. Some things would depress him, if he felt that, Prabhupada's will was not being fulfilled, or devotees were misusing Prabhupada's assets, or lacked funds, or whatever it was, or wasting their time in devotional service, becoming lazy, or putting themselves in the front instead of Krishna, or, whatever. Different things would make him upset. But otherwise, he was always happy because he was completely absorbed in that point, not what he was doing, but the attitude in which he was doing it. That's where, not that we're after pleasure, but that pleasure automatically comes when we're absorbed in this favorable devotional attitude of pleasing Guru and Gauranga. So he was a living example of that, especially in his kirtans, which were just tremendous, as Vishnu Jan was to the American devotees like a saint of the early days. Tribhuvanatha was a saint of the British Yatra. And as Vishnu Jan was the Kirtan Acharya, more or less, Tribhuvanatha Prabhu was their Kirtan Acharya in the UK. And he took that wherever he went in India, or in the Middle East. It's a little more difficult. You can't go out on the street, but the same mood is there behind it. So they were just doing these books there, and they would get arrested. He himself, I think it was in Damascus in Syria, was arrested and locked up in almost like in a box. Couldn't stand up. There was no window, nothing. It was just a windowless kind of stone box, which was only about 4 or 5 feet high. And he couldn't see anything, knew nothing what was going on outside. And he would just, all they would get there for a month, he was stuck there, was some watered soup and some stale bread. That was the only food they would get. And they were arrested there. When you go to these countries, I also had experience of getting arrested as a spy, or maybe a CIA agent, or whatever, something or another. And you can't reason. There's no reason. You just have to totally depend on Krishna. And the fact of the matter is, we're all in the same box, but we don't realize it. We think, oh, no, I'm free. But how much freedom do we really have? We're in this bodily box. We're in this box called the Earth planet, or wherever we are on the Earth planet, in our mental, subtle body of false identity. And we're in illusion. We're depending, maybe because you're devotees, but generally people are not depending on Krishna at all. They're depending on their own illusion, thinking we can protect ourselves. We are the doers. We are the enjoyers. Which, if you've read Bhagavad Gita, you'll know quite clearly we're not. We may have a little bit to share with that when we put Krishna in the center, because we're part and parcel, but our independent idea of being the enjoyer, the proprietor, the doer, etc., is an ever-increasing binding us in this material world. So he was definitely not on that mindset. He was completely in the mindset, whatever you want, Krishna, do as you wish with me. And because this is the goal of our life. The goal of our life is not to get material protection. The goal of our life is not maybe in the neophyte stage, but the goal of our life is to depend on Krishna in any situation. To depend on him, whatever you want to do. It doesn't mean depending, no, okay, Krishna, make me win. No. Depending on Krishna, is whatever you want to do with me. Narayana paraksa veda kataschana bibhiti. So he was like that. He was a wonderful example. Whatever you want, you can put me in hell if you want. Lock me in a box. But Srila Prabhupada, I'm only existing to serve your will, to assist you in this mission of Krishna consciousness. Try to disassist. I'm not Krishna conscious, he would say. I'm not at all. I'm just trying to assist Prabhupada. That's all. I just want to please Prabhupada. That's all. He wasn't so much thinking, I want to please Krishna. Tribhuvanatha was always, I just want to please Prabhupada. That's all. And if just some or another, his mood was always like that. How to please Srila Prabhupada. That is the secret of Krishna consciousness. Secret to pure devotional service. To please the pure devotee of the Lord. That's all that's required. But it has to be with sincerity, not with just, some mixed show. But there's an example of a disciple of Srila Prabhupada who is living, but not living now, you could say, but a legacy to see that, Prabhupada had so many disciples who were just so surrendered, pure. That makes one a pure devotee, even if one, you could say, doesn't have certain symptoms of a pure devotee manifested yet. But that is the primary principle or the primary characteristic of pure devotees. They're completely surrendered to their spiritual master, come what may. Success or failure, happiness or distress. So he preached in those countries. And once they distributed all the Bhagavad Gitas, they were going from shop to shop. And believe me, that is extremely difficult and extremely dangerous. But he risked his life for spreading Krishna consciousness, sowing the seeds in those, very, very difficult places. He wanted to open a temple in that area. If you just had an apartment in Beirut, staying with, perhaps there were a few people who they had contacts with here and there. They would stay sometimes, but they would go to Kuwait, where many Indian people were working. They would raise some funds there to pay for their preaching. And as I mentioned earlier, that was one thing which he felt unhappy about, that money was being collected but not being sufficiently used for preaching. So he wanted to open a center in Cairo, in Egypt. Egypt was a little bit more liberal at that time than most of the Muslim countries in that part of the world. And I remember this a little bit because I was in Nairobi at that time in Kenya. And I remember him phoning me up one time from Cairo. And he said, John, why don't we get together in Khartoum and open a center in Sudan? I thought, it was a nice idea. It's a good idea. We didn't do it. But he wanted to do it. He wanted to go anywhere where there wasn't a temple. Pioneering. Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya said every town and village. He didn't say, everywhere that's favorable. He said every town and village. We may start favorable, but ultimately every town and every village on the earth, the holy name should be spread. The chanting of the holy name. So he certainly was one of Lord Nityananda's, you could say, ambassadors for this mission. He had so much mercy from Lord Nityananda. So he preached in Cairo for quite some time. Then there was a change in the administration above the GBC, and some problems were there. The next GBC or something or another, or whatever, the GBC had some different ideas, and basically speaking, he wasn't able to carry on there preaching. Unfortunate, Krishna always has his plans. And he came back. Of course, I can't remember all the details. I wasn't privy to them. But the next time I saw him was in England. He was back in England early. Maybe, I can't remember exactly, but probably 83. When did I leave? Yeah, probably 82 or 83. He was back in the UK. And he was still trying to raise money. At that time, a change of guards was there and things weren't so easy. The GBC had changed, and he was like not welcome so much because he wasn't sort of a part of the local controlling forces. Sometimes we think a city belongs to us or something. I know some of the devotees there, I won't mention which city, but are in the particular city. One time, one of my godbrothers, who was a very good preacher, book distributor and preacher, asked if he could preach in his city because he knew I was going there regularly. I wasn't involved in the management. I said, well, I'll ask the temple president and see what he says. So I asked the temple president of that city, because his devotee wanted to open up a preaching center. He was a senior devotee, senior, in fact, to the temple president by far. So we asked if he could open up a preaching center there. Temple president, and I asked him, and he said, oh, no problem, as long as he does whatever I tell him to do. I thought, okay. So I passed him this. Of course, he never came. In other words, we think we're the controllers. We think we're the masters. No, we're not. We're here to facilitate. We're here to serve sincere devotees in their service to Prabhupada's mission. That's all. We don't, of course, intelligence and management has to be there, but it should be to increase the Sankirtan movement, to help increase the book distribution, increase the opportunity for others to come. It doesn't make a difference whether it's me, you, or anyone else, as long as they get that chance. I remember one of the nicest things that happened to me was when for the similar reason to Tribhuvanatha, I was a little bit distant. I went off and opened a center, and there was some change took place in a part of the UK that nobody ever went to, or hardly ever went, at least not for Sankirtan. So I went there to open the center alone. It was somehow by Krishna's grace, somewhat successful. Somewhat successful was there. And a very nice experience. Now, where was we going? What was I saying just now? I have to excuse me. As usual, I'm very tired at this time of day. What was the previous thing we were talking about, Tribhuvanatha Prabhu? Oh, yes, he wasn't very much, say, part of the institution, so to speak. But I still don't remember how I got onto that. Anyway, probably it was just a thought pattern. So maybe it'll come back. Pardon? Huh?
Acknowledge him.
Yeah, but that wasn't quite the same thing in my case. But anyway, whatever it was an extraordinary experience. It was something very special I wanted to share with you at that point of time. And it slipped my mind.
You had him at 82, 83
yeah, okay, that's right. That was the timing, but there was something about it that I couldn't, yes. Was in my mind and it got lost. I'm sorry. Anyway, if it comes up, it comes up. It's obviously not something that has to be brought up at this very point of time if it doesn't come up. But whatever it was. So the preaching of Krishna consciousness is the main thing in our movement. It's a movement spreading Krishna consciousness. It doesn't depend. The institution is there to facilitate the spreading of Krishna consciousness. Whether we're a GBC or temple present, is to encourage others. I've got it. So here it was. At those days, it was kind of institutional. And if you could not go to any other place to do Sankirtan without, the complete permission of the local temple president, and you had to work under the temple president and give everything to the temple president. And if you're lucky, you might give something back out of the profit. So I didn't employ that policy there. I said, everyone is welcome to come here and do your Sankirtan, and we'll charge you nothing. You keep everything, and if you want to give a donation to help us maintain the apartment, you're welcome. But otherwise, you can see what facilities you got is open. This doesn't belong to us. This is for the service of Prabhupada's mission. So devotees were coming, and they were doing Sankirtan there as much as they wanted, because I didn't have much time to do so many things. And it was wonderful because they were going on Sankirtan and they were meeting people, and those people were coming to the apartment, and several of those people joined our little center there in Newcastle. So where's the loss? There's nothing but a gain. The devotees were happy. They got their funds from their selling paintings or records or books or whatever they were doing. And we were happy too. We got their association, we got devotees, and a nice mood. So what's the problem? And those devotees, of course, also did give a donation, even though there was no obligation. This is what we're meant to develop, a mood of cooperation, a mood of working together. Very unique. And, this was Tribhuvanatha's mood. He would just share everything. He never had any, it wasn't like this is mine. Everyone was welcome, no matter who they were. He would take anyone in and somehow or another try to help them to realize that my real business is to be a devotee. I may be what I think I am or what people think I am, but that's not really what I am. And he would bring, and this is one of the problems, of course, as the movement grew, it became a little bit more sophisticated, we could say. In the beginning, our mood was bring them in and shave them up, set them on Sankirtan, out on the street, first day in the temple. The boys would come. I was a little bit stubborn. I didn't go for that. But some of the young boys and girls, they would just come as a visitor. As soon as they entered the temple room, okay, why don't you come upstairs? And you put a dhoti on them. They just came out of, some pigsty, stinking. Give them a bath, put a dhoti on, and take them out on Harinam. They didn't know what was going on. And most of them were LSD or some other drug. And we just take them out on the street. And sometimes they stay. It was like, it was a different scenario, and then things changed, of course, for various reasons, better or worse. But that mood still has to be there somewhere. You can't just go to the next stage and abandon the previous one. Otherwise, you won't get new people joining much. Only the people who are on that level of, let's say, behavior. And that was the mood. Our mood was to try to convert the those who are completely absorbed in sense gratification to devotees. And it was quite, in very different times, quite quick transformations. And he especially loved to go to big festivals. In fact, he came to New Zealand, the Sweetwaters Festival. He was there with Dristadumna, as far as I remember, one of the keys of that festival. Kalasamvara Prabhu will remember that. He was there with him. But it was an amazing mood. It's the mood. It's not what you do. It's the mood. Everything becomes effective when the mood is there, when we're connected, and when our only business is to be a transparent media for other souls to become connected to the Parampara, to become connected to Krishna. It's not about I sing better than you. He wasn't actually a singer in one sense, in terms of, he had a great voice in terms of potency, maybe not in terms of, musical analysis or something. Certainly wasn't a musician in terms of playing mridanga. He would play the mridanga in Prabhupada's own words. Prabhupada himself said he's simply flapping. Like his hands would move so fast, like this. No, because he wasn't in control. He was just an instrument for the holy name, an instrument for the mridanga to serve the holy name. And in this way, people didn't even think, but they were automatically swept up in the spirit which he had, which he was giving. As Rancho Prabhu said, his greatest gift was that he gave encouragement to everyone. It's a pretty big gift to give enthusiasm and encouragement. Enthusiasm is really the life force, you could say, in our mission. Whether it's sadhana, whether it's preaching, or whether it's service, whatever it may be, without enthusiasm, it's lifeless, practically speaking. And he managed to awaken that enthusiasm. He didn't manage to, it automatically happened because he was just bursting with enthusiasm and encouragement to others. So after his preaching in the Middle East, he came to England. He took a break, believe it or not. Now this, to me, to others, it may look, everyone probably sees it differently, but to those who know him, that break was just part of his service to Prabhupada. He took a break from the institution and was living away for some years. he did get a bit disappointed because he was stopped from preaching. He wasn't welcomed in the UK, and he wasn't getting any funding anywhere, just because he simply wanted to do Harinam Sankirtan. Is there anything wrong in that? I remember one time, and I'm just telling you some of the interesting turns that our movement has gone through, which hopefully will be lessons to learn. I remember one time I was in the UK, I came back from Africa, and they asked me to take, I was previously Sankirtan leader in the late 70s, but then at this time everything had changed. There were no books being distributed, they were distributing records and stuff. And candles. So they asked me to take one party out. I took one party out selling candles. Certainly wasn't my cup of tea. I'm really carrying boxes of these beautiful, they were very beautiful candles, going shop to shop, office to office, door to door, whatever you could do, trying to sell these beautiful candles. Now, it wasn't that it was that difficult to sell the candles. They were certainly very beautiful. But it just wasn't on. I thought, what on earth is this? You know, I could have become if I wanted to do this, I could have been a salesman or something probably beforehand, but I'm not here to just be a salesman, which is what I mean, of course, with money is going to Krishna or whatever, but still, it doesn't quite ring that this is the business. You can employ people to do this. This is it's kind of like a salesman's job, it's not Brahmachari's business doing this, really, At least that's what I could say it is, Brahmachari does anything, but I was a bit stubborn, whatever. Yeah. So I wasn't so surrendered to it, but I was taking the party out. We're doing okay. But I try to encourage them, let's try to do a little bit better during the week. So at least on Saturday, we can go on Harinam and see if we can get some books and distribute books, So we were doing that. And after 2 weeks, the authorities found out, called me in and said, what right do you have to go on Sankirtan? I thought, okay, that's the end of my selling candles. Thank you very much. So I just threw the candle in and didn't carry on doing it. But like that, it's like we sometimes forget what we're here for. We forget the goal, just to become surrendered. I wasn't so surrendered. You could look at it in another way, that I wasn't surrendered. Fair enough. I'm not denying that. But at the same time, this is the Sankirtan movement, to spread the holy name to every town and every village. And so Tribhuvanatha became a little bit, alienated for 3 years, 4 years. We came back in 87, and I wasn't in England then. By that time, I'd gone to Asia, Malaysia. And he started all up again. Things changed again. TBC changed again, and things were opening up. And the time came now for, you could say, the manifestation of whatever he'd gone through, to really get on fire. So I can't remember, I wasn't there scenario-wise, but he was a festival man. He said himself, he lives for festivals. He would organize, advertise, collect for, and do the festivals, leading the kirtan, give the class. He'd get others to lead too. It'd be just whatever inspired everyone to dance and chant, going to rock festivals, bringing kids back. In the early 70s, he'd go to these festivals and bring back a whole bunch of hippies or anybody and everybody. And, and that was the other thing. He was upset that the temple wasn't allowing that to happen anymore, because they became a little bit more sophisticated. So we had nowhere to take these kids. I remember sitting down with him one time, and actually Bhakti Vikash was there. I think, he was sannyasi. And with 3 of us were sitting and just talking what we could do about this, because the potential was there, but there was nowhere to take these kids. So we were actually thinking of trying to open up another, some ashram in the country somewhere. We could bring all these kids and just give them a chance to become Krishna conscious. It didn't happen. We all went in different directions, and it never did happen. But something needs to be there to facilitate these things. And of course, something is there, but it has to expand. Unlimited forums are required to accommodate the unlimited varieties of conditioned souls. It just takes time. The same business is going on, kirtan, prasadam. Not very difficult. Kirtan and prasadam is all that's really required. I always remember that in about 19, it's been in the, I don't know, maybe the end of the 90s, no, probably early this century, I would visit England on and off. And that was a time when there were a lot of what were called emos. You probably know, probably think that's an extinct species of bird or something, but it's not. Emo was a name given to some young kids who were kind of like, you know, couldn't see any point in life. They would generally dress in black. They had heavy metal music and pretty negative kind of an idea about the world around them. And there was others called the Goths. The Goths were like the gurus of the emos. They were like the hardcore ones, you know, and they were like worshipping the Goths, these kids. All these emos were like teenager kids. Some of you online may remember this. I think Madhu would remember this very well in Newcastle, and others will remember. But in England, it was quite a big thing. This emo, I don't know if it was everywhere, but certainly in Europe, it was a big thing. Mm-hmm. So I was never heard of it before until I went back there visiting, and I was shocked. The first time I saw it was in Birmingham, and the Devotees were doing Harinam on the main street in Birmingham, New Street, and I was with them, and it was like we just sat there doing Harinam, which was really nice. But I'm more of a guy who moves around, you know. So I said, is it okay? I asked the temple president there, is it okay if any of us want to come with me? I'd like to go around the city. They never did that. So I said, oh, he said, yeah, sure. So 2 devotees joined me, and the rest stayed and sat down, and we went around the city, and not on the main street. You know, the main street's the same all the time, up and down, same kind of people, mum, dad, kids, you know, some louts and this and that on the main street. And so I said, we go on the back streets. So we went all around the back streets. We came to this square, and I couldn't believe it. There was hundreds of these black kids in black. They looked like, you know, black penguins or something. And the whole square was just full of them. I thought, what is this? And someone said this, they're called emos. I said, well, what do they do? And then they explained, they're all teenage school kids mostly. And I said, well, do they chant? I don't know. Anyway, we're chanting anyway. We Kirtan, we just went straight in there. Hundreds of them all of a sudden swirling around us, jumping up and down. I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is where we should be. What are we doing over there? You know, this is where people want to join in. These are the kids who might become devotees in the future, you know. And I was really thought, well, if I was in this city, forget the temple, man. It's a waste of time. Just rent a warehouse in the city center and just open it up for these kids to come and just dance with their boots on and fill them up with prasadam. That's what we should be doing. We never did, because I was on the road, and of course, you know, it's easy to say these things, it's not so easy to do. But like that, his mood was, wow, give everyone a chance, especially the young people, anybody. Amazing experiences everyone gets, young or old, it doesn't matter. But anyway, he was a preacher, real full-on preacher. There was nothing else in his life except for connecting people to Krishna. He didn't care about what it affected him or not, simply. So after that, when he came back, I know initially, well, it wasn't necessarily initially, but one of the first things he did, he went to Ireland, which was his home country, because the yatra in Ireland was going through a lot of difficulty after the change of the GBCs and Guru or whatever. And they were really, really struggling. So he went there and he just picked the whole yatra up and opened a fantastic preaching center in Dublin. In his wrath, he saved basically speaking, he got it alive again. And many, many devotees joined there. And many festivals, incredible festivals, going from these little tiny towns with like 10,000 people living in, doing fantastic festivals with hundreds of people coming and dancing and chanting. It was outrage, just incredible effect of when you've got that spirit, it just happens like a magnetic force. So then he went, there was difficulty in the British yatra at that time, struggling to get back, to survive basically. So they asked him to come back to Birmingham, to England. He came back and he took responsibility in Birmingham and picked up the Birmingham Yatra again. And then he's doing festivals in England. And then somehow another devotee said, why don't you come to Africa? And he started to go to Africa. And that's perhaps one of his most famous, recently speaking, ventures into the unknown, into the dark continent, so they say. Most preachers would go to South Africa because South Africa is quite opulent, it's quite westernized, and there are 1 million Hindus living in South Africa who are all favorable, many of them favorable, beautiful temples, beautiful place in many ways. But no, he may have gone there to visit, but he was going to dangerous countries, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Zambia, all these different countries, Malawi. And believe me, I can say for sure, I've been to some of them, they are very dangerous. And he would go there with his festival team. He gathered a festival team together, and much of the year they'd spend there preaching, traveling around in these countries, doing festivals, trying to get, and many times it's dangerous. Some of them actually got killed while they were down there. And not so much from, you could say, from the local people, but from various unexpected events. He opened up orphanage for the kids, so the kids without any schooling or anywhere to stay or anything. And he knew, because he had gone through it as a child, practically speaking, what it was like. So he wanted to help. He never asked, even though he was senior to everyone, practically speaking, the whole continent. He would just sleep on the floor. He would never ask for anything in terms of prasadam or facilities. Just please, if you just allow help to preach. But he never asked any. Just encouraged the devotees to preach, not just to the Indian community, but to the local people. That's what Prabhupada wanted. He wanted our mission to spread to the local people wherever we are. That was the idea. That somehow or another to try to give everyone a chance. Prabhupada wasn't physically present, but I can tell you that Prabhupada was so pleased that devotees preaching to the Black people in Africa. I spent several years there in that part of the world in the 70s, late 70s, more or less. Very late 70s, early 80s. It's just, you can feel Prabhupada's mercy. When you take that little risk, maybe it's a little barrier that you go beyond. It's kind of like, it's hard. But the more one takes that little risk to preach, one feels unless one's doing it to try to say, just see what I did. He wasn't that sort of person. He never asked for recognition. Never. He never asked for very much. Just, if you can help us to do this, thank you. Otherwise, he just did it. Just did it. He just do it. And what the result was depend on Krishna. Again and again, they would be harassed, hustled, sometimes threatened, but he would just carry on preaching the message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, from village to village, town to town, wherever he could go, seeing that these countries were really in need. The people had ever heard of Krishna consciousness, never heard of it. Places, and even today in the world, there are many places, I'm sure there are, where people have never met or heard of Krishna conscious movement. I'm sure there are. And for whatever reason, Krishna's in control. In about year 2000, when Tribhuvanatha Prabhu was in Nairobi in Kenya, he was getting sick, and one of the devotees, Indian devotee, I believe, who was a doctor, tested and found that he had stomach cancer. So he was diagnosed with stomach cancer. So what to do? He made some efforts to try to cure or recover, but it didn't happen. Maybe delayed somewhat. He was in hospital for a little while in the UK for a little very short term. He wouldn't stay long, just some tests and some mild endeavors to cure or whatever. But he wouldn't stay. I remember one time I went to visit him in the hospital, and they wanted to keep him in, of course, but he didn't want to stay. Somehow or another, Yeah, I think he said he was going to go and stay with some devotees near the manor, and he left the hospital, but he didn't go to that. He caught a train and went straight to a preaching program, a festival program which was being held. He trained up many devotees to do the festival program, and it's still going on to this very, very day in the UK. The devotees he trained are still doing it to this 20 years later, to this very day. They're not doing it so much in Africa for various reasons, but they're doing it in the UK now regularly, many festivals throughout the year. So he went on the train to this festival. It's in Brighton on the south coast. And he went to that festival and he led the kirtan, he gave the class, etc. Even in his sick condition, he would never stop. He lived for preaching. He didn't preach to live, he lived for preaching. Some people preach to live, in other words, to get something. He didn't. He gave everything for the preaching of Krishna consciousness. And then he was just couldn't stop. On his last time, I was just a visitor to the UK in those years, but we generally see him whenever we go there. And the last time we saw him was in 2001 on Prabhupada's appearance day. He came. He was 2 months later. He left his body, but he came for that festival. And he would drive himself. As I said earlier this morning, he didn't like people to do things for him, particularly. It was only for Prabhupada. So he never liked to accept service on his own account. He would eat whatever Krishna provided. He didn't even know whether he eaten or not, practically speaking. He would go all day without eating for preaching. You'd have to remind him to stop preaching or to stop the kirtan if you wanted to eat or sleep. He didn't like sleeping. He said, I hate sleeping. His own words, he said, I hate sleeping. It's such a waste of time. I hate it. We could be preaching. And he chanted a lot of rounds, as I mentioned. Nobody knows. He seemed to be, whenever he wasn't preaching, his hands was in his bead bag chanting. He was reading. He said, I asked him one time, many devotees asked him to take sannyas. And I asked him, why are you taking sannyas? And he said, oh no, I haven't studied Prabhupada's books enough. Maybe one day I'll sit down somewhere and really study, and then maybe. And funny thing was that a year before he passed away, he was put on the sannyas list. But he never took sannyas because he left his body. But he did spend time studying Prabhupada's books. And as I said earlier, Lord Chaitanya tells us example. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, we see when Lord Chaitanya was in Sri Rangam, there was one illiterate Brahmin there who was crying, holding Gita and crying. Lord Chaitanya said, why are you crying? He said, my spiritual master asked me to read the book, but I can't read. I'm illiterate. Then why are you crying? He said, because whenever I think of Krishna, the chariot driver of Arjuna, that Krishna takes the role of servant of his own devotee, I can't stop crying. And Lord Chaitanya embraced him and said, you may not be able to read one word of Bhagavad Gita, but you have understood every word. Like that. Tribhuvanatha wasn't illiterate exactly, of course. He did know the philosophy. He preached exactly from Prabhupada's books and words, especially from his words, what he heard from listening to his lectures. He would listen to his lectures whenever the opportunity was there also. And simply by that surrendered hearing, Prabhupada would speak through him, convincing huge audiences, even sometimes challengers about Krishna consciousness. They would be impressed. So on that last day, 1977, we had the opportunity. He left for Brazil after which he was taking some treatment in Brazil. In fact, he left his body in Brazil in October 2001 in a devotee's house in Brazil. He left his body in the night. He was still fully conscious. And his last request was, as far as I know, his servant, Giridhari Prabhu, who is now running the festival programs with him, he asked him for, he said, I want to drink a cup of milk. I think that was the last, shortly after he left his body. And he was at that Prabhupada Appearance Festival. Somehow or another, I was just a visitor too. And he was asked, or somewhere or another, he led the Guru Puja for Prabhupada. It was really, everyone who knew him knew he was on his last days, but he still led the Guru Puja, and he stood, and he kind of stomped during the kirtan. He wasn't like such a kind of like a ballerina type dancer. He was more of a stomper type dancer. And he was dancing a little bit, moving his feet at least, but playing Madunga and singing at the top. He would sing with such a spirit. It's like his whole body was singing. It wasn't just his voice. Everything was like vibrate, you know. You could feel the energy would just vibrate off of him when he would lead kirtan. And he was leading the kirtan, and practically his veins in his neck would come out. It was such power. He would give everything for kirtan, everything. And I remember I mentioned this morning in a class in here in Manipur that with a couple of God brothers, we were kind of on the side watching Tribhuvanatha. We're just giving. One of the devotees said, if he carries on like this, he's going to die. You know, it's like he was bursting almost, you know. He's going to leave his body. Got to stop him. Got to stop him. The other devotee, if he carries on like this, he'll go back to Godhead. So let him carry on. You know, it was like, let him know not. But it was like you couldn't stop him anyway. He was just giving him, he gave himself to Prabhupada completely. He offered himself entirely to Sri Prabhupada. And what can you say? That's the sign of a pure devotee. It's a sign of a surrendered soul. It's a sign of one who's in a liberated, one who's in a liberated condition. Doesn't ask anything. Oh, I want this, I want that. Of course he wanted to preach. That's another thing. He didn't preach whimsically. You know. He preached completely for Prabhupada. He didn't preach for himself. Just wanted to please Prabhupada. Okay, well, time is flying by, and we're all getting things to do today. And I'm sure you're all getting tired if you're in New Zealand. It must be coming up to 10:30, 11 o'clock at night over there for you in New Zealand, and getting late in Sydney also, and Brisbane, and wherever else you are over there. In Australia and in Malaysia, you're okay there. It's just a nice afternoon, but you probably want to go for the Sunday feast if you're still there. In the Philippines, I think you're in lockdown, and in India, what you're doing in India there, opening up now. Maybe it's time for lunch or something. And in Europe, you're getting bored, I guess. I'm not sure what you're doing in Europe. Maybe hungry if you haven't taken breakfast. So that's it. There could probably a lot more details. We spoke a few of those this morning, but you know, there'll be a book. There is a book. This little book is there already. I don't know if you can see it. I don't know how it looks on the screen. It's a little book contains some of the lectures of Tribhuvanatha Prabhu. Not many. It's somebody, Sandipani Muni Prabhu put this together. One devotee, not his disciple, but one of his, let's say, devotees whose life inspired. He never gave initiation, although hundreds of devotees wanted to take initiation. He never did. But he wouldn't give initiation as a matter of life. But anyway, it's a nice little book on some of this simple, very simple, down to earth, easy to follow, clear, old time preaching. Nowadays, you have to kind of think of something no one's ever heard of before, and sing a tune no one's ever heard of before, something very fancy. But then it was just simply repeating what Prabhupada gave, and it was quite simple. His preaching was simple, but what makes a lecture of any use is the purity. It's not what you say, but the purity. We're not here to get scholars and false followers. Prabhupada wanted pure devotees, so Tribhuvanatha was one of those pure devotees. And we're privileged to speak a few words, having a few moments of his association over the years. And we hope that you can pick up on something, spirit in your life, to try to, dedicate our lives and preach Krishna consciousness. And there will be a book, at least we're told there will be a book published. I think Rancho Prabhu is working on it, of his devotional life. And it's a great beacon or example for others to be inspired by. This is another characteristic of a great devotee. He doesn't expect people to imitate. He is what they are, but they treat everyone else for what they are too. He was great with kids. He was so encouraging to the ladies. He was, to people who were of other religions, no matter who they were, he was always, somehow or another encouraged people to, adopt Krishna consciousness in their lives. Hare Krishna. And he was a brahmachari. He was married for a little while, but not long. He was basically a brahmachari for his whole life. And Hare Krishna. Naham vipro nachanara patir na pivai shona shuddha. We're not brahmachari, we asked the vanaprastha shuddha. We're the servant of the servant. That was Tribhuvanatha. Jai Tribhuvanatha Prabhu ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any questions or comments? What advice would you give to youth beginning to preach? Thank you. May you please provide some tips on how to develop a good service mood to do preaching that's pleasing to Srila Prabhupada and to not get puffed up. Thank you very much for a sincere devotee who wants to preach, young devotee. Well, you're in a good, from your point of view, just mention you're in a good situation where you are in terms of association opportunity. Association is very, very important. Association with devotees who are, let's say, in that spirit of sharing Krishna consciousness, in the mood where they're trying to become selfless, by following the selfless example, maybe of a selfless guru or Srila Prabhupada. So what advice will we give? Well, that's one thing. Try to get their association as much as you can and pick up. By association, we pick up not just techniques, not just some statements or some knowledge, but we pick up qualities. Qualities. Even Hiranyakashipu said association acts just like that of a crystal stone, which reflects whatever comes before it. So there's a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Sushushroshdhanasya Vasudeva Gataruchi, Shyanmahat Sevaya Viprapunyatirtha Nishevanat. That by service to those great devotees, we're freed of all vice. Great service is done. By service, one gains an affinity for hearing the messages of Godhead. So the process of becoming a preacher with the right attitude is submissive hearing from the right source. This is how the qualities of a Vaishnava start to manifest. They're there in a pure devotee, in full. They may not be manifested before us for various reasons, but they're there. And if we associate with submissive hearing, the process of submissive hearing is a secret. Prabhupada said, when he took initiation from his spiritual master, most of the devotees in the Allahabad center didn't really know the fact that Srila Prabhupada had previously associated with his Guru Maharaj a long time back. And Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj did remember. And at initiation he said, yes, this young man, he hears very nicely. And the hearing process is the secret, to hear nicely from other devotees and to hear from, of course, from Prabhupada and Prabhupada's books, to try to hear And so hearing means we try to put into practice what we hear. Krishna will do the rest. He'll give you the inspiration, to what to say, how to deal with others, etc., etc., with his sadhana and good hearing and appropriate association, which is favorable in that regard. So my tip for, because there's going to be different stages of preaching, and you're not, but in your particular case, where you're a mature devotee in so many ways, and where you have a heart for preaching, and we're with devotees who are preaching, just try to refine your submissive hearing from the right source. Krishna will do the rest. But I don't know, but I remember in the earlier years of my life in this movement, it seemed that was the case. We didn't really have much of the facility of now. We had no lectures from Prabhupada. There were very few available. We had no mobiles and no computers, and most of those were very young. And it was mainly on hearing attentively and inspiration that Krishna will inspire you. Purity. This is called purity. Purity is the force. It's not learning. It's not techniques. It's purity. Purity is not just some external measurable factor. It's a question of your heart's intention, the attitude. So thank you very much. And how not to get puffed up. It's hard not to get puffed up sometimes, but because we're so used to it. As we heard, Tribhuvanatha Prabhu was so indebted to Prabhupada that he saved him. He always thought, he saved me from an abominable situation. I need a paper tissue, otherwise mucus is coming out my nose. He was always feeling that mood of indebtedness, just seeing how fallen condition. Prayer. We pray. We see in Bhagavatam on several occasions, Lord Brahma himself, Priyavata Maharaj, and others would pray that I not become proud in the execution of my duty. Please protect me, my Lord. You can pray to the Lord for that. And again, by submissive hearing, this realization of the fact that we are proud and feeling repentant to the fact that we are proud will take place. Repentance. When there's genuine repentance there for our, whatever our narrative or offensive mentality or whatever it is, starts to manifest. So the first question you were asking already, so you are on the path. That how can I be protected from becoming proud? They say even a pauper is proud of his penny. Even a beggar is proud of his begging can, his tin can. Everyone's proud in this conditioned world because of illusion of identification. As long as we think we're the body, then certainly for sure there's going to be an element of this false ego. Pride is there, puffed up, whatever you wish to call it. Krishna is also there, and if you're sincere, Krishna will place us in situations to help us to let go or to give up this attachment or this false identity. And he's just wanting us to turn to him. You can't get rid of it by some external technique because the root has to be dealt with. External techniques may help to subside it or curtail it to some extent. But ultimately it's the root, that false ego, false identity, etc. So what to do? Just keep praying. Process is a transformative process, so that will take time. Transformation will be there. Next one. This is from our dear Gauridas Prabhu in York. The grand old Duke of York is, I don't know if he's still there or not. Sometimes the devotees come through extreme circumstances whilst preaching, like Tribhuvanatha Prabhu, but other times we have instances like what happened in Bangladesh. in the last 2 days, 2 weeks or whatever. How should we understand that Krishna is always protecting his devotees? This is always a challenging thing when we're in the neophyte stage. And it's, of course, even in the advanced stage, the advanced devotees may understand what's going on, but they don't stand back. We see that Advaitacharya was ready to manifest his four-arm form to slice off the heads of all the offenders. We see Lord Chaitanya was ready to slice off the head of Madai. We see this, although in the heart, the mood may be one of love and compassion, you could say, in a different way, manifesting in different ways accordingly. So one may wonder at every stage. It's not a new thing. We see Jesus Christ, according to Christian history, was crucified. Haridas Thakur was beaten with intent to kill. So many of the members of various religious orders have been slaughtered in Europe by the hundreds of thousands by so-called whatever evangelists or something. Christians fight killing each other like anything. In Islam also the same thing takes place between different sects of there, and everywhere in the world we see these things are going on. And we see in this case devotees in Bangladesh were harassed, killed. I don't know how many, but I know one at least was killed in the riots, where there were anti-Hindu riots that took place. They weren't just against us. Apparently they were anti-Hindu, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I read. And this has been going on. Sri Sambhadaya, so many of them were slaughtered. Sometimes even Shaivites and Vaishnavites have had clashes. It's been going on from time immemorial in this world because of ignorance, because of greed, because of whatever. There are different, anarthas which living entities have. So why doesn't Krishna protect his devotees from all of this? Of course, absolutely speaking, everyone's a devotee, but those who are actually practicing Krishna say, I take special care and I will protect you, do not worry. But what is that protection? There's different levels of protection. In the neophyte stage, it's seen as primarily as a physical protection. It's seen primarily as a physical resource, provider. God is the physical provider. Like in the case of Tribhuvanatha Prabhu, as an example, he never saw in that sense that God is my physical provider or my physical protector. He is if he wants, and he isn't if he wants. A devotee is prayers to the Lord, or you may do what you like with me. Lord Chaitanya himself prays, Janananda, Janananda. You can crush me in your embrace or make me broken-hearted. You can do whatever you like with me. Okay, so that's slightly more advanced, but we should at least understand that situation, even if we don't feel it. You cannot say that devotee, I think what was his name, Partha? No, can't remember, whatever it was, who was killed by the rioters there in Bangladesh recently. What state of consciousness he was in, who can say? We may know what state we're in, and we may not be able to relate to it. But we do not know what's it. We know the one thing is that we're all going to die sooner or later. Whether it's a car crash, whether it's COVID, whether it's cancer, whether it's this or that, being shot or beaten to death, whatever it may be, we're all going to die sooner or later. That is a fact, and nothing can stop that. When we say we, now if we say we obviously we're referring to the body. But we know we are not the body. So what is it that Krishna is protecting? He may protect the body. In fact, he's protecting everybody already, although we don't recognize it. But he may protect literally the body of a Vaishnava from such threats, as he did with Prahlad Maharaj or with Haridas Thakur. But the most important protection is not the physical, it's the consciousness. Protecting our consciousness. Where do you read amongst pure devotees prayers, please, my Lord, please protect me that I don't get old, that I don't get sick, that I don't die, that I don't this, that I don't that? You don't find that. You find they're praying that may I never fall from my eternal position as your servant. May I serve you eternally. Please protect me. Even Prabhupada was praying, to Radharani, please, that I not fall under the influence of Maya. Prabhupada said our only prayer should be, my dear Lord Krishna, You're in my heart as a super soul. Please remind me to always chant your holy name. You may send me to hell. I don't mind. But please don't allow me to forget to chant your holy names. So the real devotee's protection is internal. That the Lord is protecting us. And this is the final instruction after the one that you're referring to in the Gita. Sarvadharmam prachagya mamikam sharanam braja. Aham tvam sarvapapabhyo moksha ishami mashitra. Krishna isn't saying, I'll protect your body in this battlefield, Arjuna, don't worry. He did, but he's not saying that. He's saying, I'll protect you from fear. We're all afraid. The real protection that Krishna gives is protection. What is fear is based on false identity. It's based on attachment to this body and the world around us. Protecting us from fear. 1. 2, and all sinful reactions. He'll release us. What are those sinful reactions? It's not just what we think of. Oh, why am I being killed? Krishna says he'll protect me from these, but that's not what he means. The sinful reaction is the mentality of thinking that I belong in this world. This is me. This is my body. I am the doer. I am the enjoyer. This is the sinful reaction one gets protected from. Not just the sinful reaction which results in being murdered or being robbed or being sick or become whatever. It may be losing things. It's this mentality of seeing ourselves in the center. So we can't say that. Devotee may have been so mature, he was just depending on Krishna. So the first part of it, of course, is give up all other forms of shelter and fully depend on me. And that's the perfection of life. So whatever it may be, Krishna has his plans. So from the other's point of view, of course, that may have a different response. There may be, if one's a Kshatriya, the response will be one thing. If one's Brahmana, the response will be another. Obviously, Kshatriyas and Brahmins do not respond to the same incident in the same effective way. The Kshatriya's duty is obviously to inflict relevant punishment on the offenders. Very serious offense, extremely serious. Therefore, an extremely serious punishment is inflicted without even a trial, on the spot, inflicting. That would be a Kshatriya. He would be on the spot in no time and heads would be rolling. Simple as that. For a Brahmin, it would be one of compassion. A different thing. And everyone will respond. Others will be scared stiff and run for their lives. Everyone responds differently. And on the platform of devotional service, the reaction, but to understand the higher principle is important so we don't become, that's mundane religion is based on physical considerations. It's not based on spiritual considerations. So this is a little hard, although not unheard of. I remember one time I was in London at one television program and there was a panel of challenging atheists, basically, challenging religion. There was one Christian lady in a wheelchair with terminal cancer and they were challenging her, where's your Jesus now? He's not protecting you, is he? Look at you. You're dying. Maybe we could help you more than he can. They were challenging her. And she said, no, he is protecting me. They said, oh, come on, what do you mean by that? He's not protecting. Look at you. He said, he's protecting me. He said, what do you mean then? Tell us what you mean by this. He said, she said, I feel him in my heart and I have no fear of death. He's protecting me. Of course, they couldn't relate to that. They couldn't really understand what we make of that one. But it's a fact. She was a Christian lady, but she was definitely tuned in, connected to Jesus, connected to the source, to the Parampara. In that way, one is fearless in the face of death. We will have to face it sooner or later. Don't think it won't come to me. It'll come to all of us. You just said this is the most amazing thing in the universe. People think it will never happen to me. It's the craziest thing in the universe. Only the amazing. Okay. Sometimes. That's it. No one else has said anything. And you're all still there. No one's left. I'm surprised.
Jivaprana has a question.
Huh? Jiva, the devotee sat next to me. Come here. Come here. He has a question.
I came already.
Oh, yeah. Who's got the question? The one devotee sitting in the room here has a question. What is the question?
So how can we properly encourage people, especially devotees, and not to come into the flattering?
How can we encourage devotees not to, without necessarily flattering? Sometimes flattery is a part of it. It depends again, if you ever, when you do have kids, you'll know. Sometimes we have to use different techniques to encourage them. You almost sometimes have to, I mean, not say lie, but sometimes even trick people. Prabhupada said, I tricked you all. I said, Krishna consciousness. Like Krishna consciousness is so easy. Very simply chant. He said, I tricked you all. It's not, we know it's not always so easy. It is in reality, but it's not in relativity. We're in relativity still. But he said, I tricked you all. So sometimes some transcendental, out of love, you may trick your child in various ways sometimes, you know, saying, if you do this, you'll get that, or whatever it is, and so on and so forth. So the intention there is to, if the sincere intentions to help the person, then flattery or no flattery, you're going to use whatever's required to encourage that person. The first and foremost thing, as they say, is that generally speaking, in all walks of life, is you have to have it yourself in order to give it to others. So if you're encouraged, if you're enthusiastic, if you're sincere, you know, okay, we may make errors of judgment. We may make, you know, whatever, dealing with others. We're not on the transcendental plane. Everyone's got their own little, you know, conception of life. So we may not, maybe we think later we should have said something different or done something different. But the intention was correct. The intention. So it's a learning curve. It's a learning process of how to encourage others. And if it does, if you encourage, generally speaking, you try, you know, in most things, there are different steps. You know, I don't know, I can't remember at this moment, I don't think. Various steps, how you approach people, depending again on who they are. You know, you may just try to, you may just ask them, that doesn't work. You try to point out various, but just like you take, for instance, Vasudeva and Kamsa, how we got how Vasudeva eventually convinced Kamsa not to kill Devaki. He was about to kill her. He wasn't listening to pretty much anything, but eventually he was able to appease him. So he tried different ways to encourage Kamsa not to kill Devaki. So you try different ways. You don't just stick to the same thing if it doesn't work. You have to see. That doesn't work, then you would try another one. And flattery may be one of those things. It certainly is. Oftentimes it's the first. Oftentimes it's the first one. In fact, Prabhupada quotes Tribhuvanatha Saraswati in that regard. He was the uncle of Gopal Bhatt, a very famous Vaishnava who lived in Vrindavan. And he quotes him as saying, when we go to people, you have to put a straw in your mouth. Now, that doesn't mean literally necessarily. In our particular situation, people think you're, you know, some crazy guy from the country if you do that or something. Walk in the streets of Paris, you know, you've got this big straw in your mouth. They'll probably call the psychiatrist department or some mental hospital or something to take you away. But it's the heart. That means in all humility you approach people with great humility. My dear sir, you're such a one. You're such, my dear madam, whatever it is, you're so beautiful. Where'd you get your, you know, your good looks from? Where'd you get, you know, you're so intelligent. You're so qualified. You're such a fortunate, nice. You're so kind. You know, flattery. He said. And then once they say, okay, what can I do for you? Well, my dear sir, please give up all your nonsense and take this book. Because don't say it like that. The principle is there. You first of all capture the person's heart a little bit, and whatever it takes. And then introduce, when the time's right, what you've got to give. What do you want to share? Philosophy definitely has a part to play. I mean, not to spend all your time flattering them, don't get to the point. It has to be with the intention of connecting that person, not just for the sake of feeling good that they say, oh, thank you very much. No, but to actually try to bring them to Krishna consciousness. If that doesn't work, don't get into it. Why are you talking like that? I know what you want. You just want my money, don't you? So, then you don't use that technique. To see, you can't absolutely say there's, but generally people like to have a little bit of praise. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from somewhere. Oh, wow, that's fantastic. Oh, it's a really nice country. I went there once, or whatever it is. Something which will make them feel like you appreciate them. Usually people need that. Devotees also need it. It's not just people in general, but devotees generally need it too. A little bit of flattery is also there sometimes. At least recognition, nothing else. Thank you very much. Well, in one sense, there's nothing to really thank very much. In another sense, there is. It depends which way you see it. But a little bit of that sometimes. Okay. I'm going to finish with the kirtan. And thank you all very much on this one. Try to remember Tribhuvanatha Prabhu. There is a film. Just let's see a minute. I have it actually on my computer somewhere. I don't know where it went. It was on my screen before, but I don't expect I can get it now.
Can you put back?
Put back what?
The Zoom. Is it behind?
Is it behind the Zoom?
Mm-hmm.
No. Anyway, there is one. It's MP4. I don't know what that means, anything. I'll send a link. Is that okay, Rasika, if you're still there? I'll send you the link and you can watch this film about Tribhuvanatha Prabhu. Okay, if you want. It's about 30 minutes long. There are others as well, many. You can go on Google and look up Tribhuvanatha Prabhupada disciple, and you can probably see a few things of him leading kirtans and preaching and talking and what have you. Yeah, mostly later ones, of course. We never did those things much in the beginning of ISKCON. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. I've not seen him for years. Now, Tribhuvanatha Prabhu used to sing very simple tunes, but that wasn't what he'd sing all the time, for sure, not very often. He had a tune, I can't remember what it was, on Harinam. Very, let's say, easy tune, but a tune that you couldn't help but follow. It was so ecstatic, and it would just get stronger and stronger. I can't remember what it was right now. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I'll just sing a tune anyway. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, oh Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, oh Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Go Premanande, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Tribhuvanatha Prabhu Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Sarasvate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nivasesha Sunyavadi Pastacharde Shatarde Jai Haribo Haribo
Haribo
Haribo
Haribo
Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Transcendental Book Distribution Ki Jai. Preaching in every town and village Ki Jai. Lord Chaitanya's Harinam Sankirtan movement Ki Jai. Go Premanande. Oh, and if you're in Ireland, this is a special message for the Irish devotees online. Don't forget Tribhuvanatha Prabhu. He's like the ISKCON's patron saint of Ireland. Okay? And also Africa and Scotland, and Middle East and wherever you are. He went to New Zealand. He went to Australia also. And he came to Malaysia. He came to see me in Malaysia one time. He came through Malaysia and he came all the way to the temple. He was just transiting for 8 hours. So we spent a lunch and afternoon together one time in Kuala Lumpur. So he came there also. And he went to many places, New York also, and many places in Europe preaching, Padayatra, this thing, that thing, what to speak of India. Jai, Tribhuvanatha Prabhu Ki Jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Haribo.
Haribo. Haribo.